so much for joining us today, Dr. Shattuck.
Well, it's great to be here. Thanks again for the invitation. I really appreciate it.
So, as you know, we are talking about abstracts today, which I anticipate this will be a very popular webinar. So, just to dive right in, what are the key components for a successful abstract? Should it be structured a certain way or include certain things?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Hopefully, I can answer in about 250 words and we can call it a day, right? We'll be very abstract with talking about abstracts. So, I suppose by way of introduction, I haven't reviewed abstracts for the HBAs, but I've reviewed abstracts for the AABAs. So, I'd like to think I've seen plenty of abstracts in my day, of course, written plenty. And so, I think for me, the key component is really clarity, right? There are certain elements, and I think we'll talk about this either maybe with this question or some of the other ones. I think there's one on successful abstracts. There are certain things that, of course, have to be in there, but you have very little space, of course, 250 words or so, to get your point across, to tell the story about the research that you're doing. Um, from the perspective of somebody who is reviewing abstracts for conferences, clarity again, because we want to be able to read it once, understand what you're talking about, what the project, the paper, the presentation is going to be about, without having to go back through and read it again. This also helps in terms of, these questions about where do we allocate this talk to? Is it going to fit in with human health, or is this something about human behavior or things like that, right? Kind of making the job of the reviewers that bit easier. And I'm going to keep harping on clarity all throughout this webinar. As I recall, the HBA abstracts are not required to be structured, but from my perspective, I think having a structured abstract anyway, even if it's not required, is a really good way to kind of structure the abstract, right? Because you've got your introduction, your methods, results, conclusion, and so that gives you a really good framework for sitting down and and just writing the thing. Um, so yeah, from my perspective, I think that's the sort of best, easiest framework to use is that structured abstract.
So great points. So how do you craft a clear and concise title that reflects your research while also attracting interest? And what is your stance on titles with puns in them?
I'm in favor of a good pun, but I will say that maybe those are a little bit better left for the actual paper than the conference abstract. Um, that said, man, I love a good pun. I think it's great to have in the title some kind of hook, right? What's the thing that's going to bring people to the talk or to the paper, I suppose. Um, for anthropology, I think this tends to work out for those of us who do some qualitative research and things like that. Usually you can find a really good, short sentence or something like that to pull from that has a really good statement about something, right? That really draws the attention. So you can start with that in quotations, then a colon, and more of a descriptive um, kind of title. I'd say too that for me, I think I tend to prefer descriptive titles over kind of aspirational ones, right? Especially for conferences. There's so many of these abstracts, people are looking at them, their eyes are going across because they're reading all these abstracts. Something short, sweet, punchy, maybe with a pun, is a great way to kind of call attention to it, have that hook. Is there something unique that is about the study? Is it in a novel population or a novel sample? Are you using a novel method? Um, and I think going back to the other question of, what goes into a good abstract, having an idea of that hook, that selling point, that little bit of uniqueness about the study, putting that into the abstract, highlighting that is also a really good way to, again, kind of call attention to the work, make your abstract stand out a little bit more.
I felt like personally attacked with the pun question because I always try to do a good pun. I had a talk that was make no bones about it, about bone mineral density. So, yes, love a good pun. So we get this question all the time, our next one, about ongoing research. And so because abstracts are due in early fall, a lot of people's research is still going on. They're still collecting data. Maybe they, don't have final numbers of participants, or their statistical analyses are going to change. And so
Mhm.
we have another webinar with Dr. Amanda Vale to kind of touch on that in a little bit more detail. But what advice do you have for students when it comes to framing a research question or even an objective when their data collection is still in progress?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's something I've run into before with my own research. The timing of the abstract submission is unfortunately sometimes not the greatest, right? So that, yeah, exactly. You've got data analysis still ongoing, data collection still ongoing, or in my case, as I recall, I had submitted an abstract that was associated with a paper. I'd gotten the paper reviews back. Reviewers suggested changing the statistical analysis. It made perfect sense. It was great advice. And so between submitting the abstract and then doing the actual presentation, I went back and I'd kind of revised the methods. The overall results hadn't changed much, right? So that's a good thing. Um, I think using flag words in the abstract, like, preliminary results or, this ongoing research promises to show something, 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 is a good way to kind of flag for both reviewers and we're all, reviewing each other's abstracts. We all understand that everybody's in the same boat. Research is still ongoing, right? So I don't think that it's ever really been an issue for reviewers, at least in my experience, to reject an abstract because research is still ongoing. I think it's kind of understood there's always going to be that little wiggle room.
So we talked about results, and also I know there is a box that individuals can, fill out while they're submitting their abstract that is a note for reviewers as well. So that might be a good place to
Mm-hmm.
kind of highlight that it is an ongoing project. But of course, to get there, we have to use our methods. So I am definitely an oversharer and I want to tell everybody everything about what I am doing. But what level of detail should be included in the methods section?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And this is the problem where, I think a lot of students and even a lot of faculty find it difficult to write an abstract is because there's so much we want to share and so much we want to say and so many things that are important to the story of the research, right? How do you whittle that all down into 250 words? For the methods, I think it's really the key elements. What are the key statistical tests? What tests do the main results hinge on, right? There's always going to be some ancillary analyses or something like that where, maybe you can wave your hands at that a little bit in the abstract with a few words, but the main results are hinging on a regression model or whatever it may be, right? So that needs to be in there. Um, the name of the statistical test, OLS regression, logistic regression, Pearson correlation, Spearman correlation, whatever. Um, if you are using biomarker methods, that's another really good thing I think to put in there that, we used enzyme immunoassays for cortisol or something like that, or we analyzed such and such number of SNPs, whatever it may be. Um, the particular biological kind of substrate, I don't think it's quite necessary unless it's really relevant, right? So is it saliva? Is it dried blood spots? Maybe not super relevant for an abstract. Maybe that could be saved for the talk. Unless, of course, gosh, maybe you're applying a new method to, or a method to a new biological um, sample, right? Something normally done in blood that you're applying to saliva or something like that. Um, I think the sample size and kind of basic descriptives are also really good to see so that people, reviewers know, what kind of sample we're talking about. Is this primarily in women, men, older folks, younger folks, these kinds of things. And those are things that can be done really quick, right? N equals 85, mean age equals whatever it is. Um, and I think where I've seen people kind of overshare, maybe to use your terms, Courtney, is the real minutia, because people get really excited about their methods and things like that, and that's great. But we don't really need to know the exact steps you took for data reduction, right? We don't need to know that you collapsed such and such a variable um, into a binary variable or something like that. Again, unless it's super relevant for the results. Otherwise, that's stuff that I think can be shared, during the talk. That's the opportunity to really get into the weeds, and especially the Q&A session as well, where it really get into the weeds with the methods.
So the next question is, how should you tailor your abstract for a multidisciplinary audience like the HBA community?
Yeah, another really good question. I was thinking about that one a lot, doing my homework for this talk, and I think the maybe the best way to do this is, and again, Madison, it's striking a balance, right? Because there are folks at the HBA who are not anthropologists, but the bulk of them are going to be, and so there's this kind of path you can kind of take, this sort of losing the metaphor, I don't know, thread the eye of a needle, something like that, where you can get away with a little bit of jargon, but maybe not a lot of jargon, if that makes sense, right? So it's probably safe to just assume that most people know who the Hadza are, right? Or the Hadzabe, that they know that they're a foraging group and so on and so forth, right? So that saves you all those sentences where you would normally have to describe who they are, right? Things like that. Most people are going to know what cortisol is, these kinds of things. That said, I think avoiding, and this is honestly not something that I see anthropology do a lot. We have jargon. Let me rephrase that. This is something I see more at the triple A's than I do at the HBA's. So us human biologists, and maybe this is just my human biology blinders being on, but I don't think we really have a lot of jargon relative to other STEM fields, relative to cultural anthropology, triple A's, and so on. But I would say that when you're writing anything for a interdisciplinary audience, trying to avoid that discipline specific jargon as much as you can, right? Because people are not going to understand what you're talking about, or you're going to have to then take time, if you want to introduce some kind of big concept that not many people are familiar with, you then have to waste time, waste space in the abstract explaining what that is. I think too, and I think this is true for anything we do, right? Trying to connect our results to the bigger picture, to the rest of the world, to stuff outside of anthropology is always a really good idea. If you can do that in the last sentence of the abstract, right? These results speak to whatever it is, issues of indigenous health, for groups undergoing acculturation or something like that, or issues of medical stigma, for chronic health problems, these kinds of things. Having a kind of short and sweet, punchy sentence at the end of the abstract, I think not only it's good for you as the researcher and the author to think about how these results kind of, yeah, transcend anthropology or how they speak to larger issues. And then I think it's also good for people who maybe aren't in anthropology you know, to see that, right? Because they don't have to spend the time thinking about how this connects. Somebody has done that work for them, if that makes sense.
All right, so the student has the abstract. They have balance, which I feel like is going to be our key word of the webinar. They have their maybe pun title. They have their why at the end and tie it all up with a pretty bow. So then they do their poster, and it sounds great, fine and dandy. How can they translate that into a potential publication?
Mm. Absolutely. So I think with any presentation, whether it's a poster or a podium, taking good notes about the questions you get asked, right? Or the suggestions that people make, going back to the data, assuming that the abstract or the publication isn't already submitted. But if you get some really good advice from somebody, go back, fix it, or consider, that other method that they mentioned or something like that, right? Or that other perspective that they mentioned. Um, the abstract that you've submitted can probably be repurposed, right, for a publication abstract. You shouldn't obviously self-plagiarize, but you've got the structured abstract. The methods may change based on the comments you've gotten. You may come back to the abstract and say, well, actually, what I really want to do is sort of foreground this aspect of the research now that I've presented it and I've had comments back, things like that. And of course, there is only so many ways you can talk about running a regression, right? Um, let's see, what else? Yeah, again, I think really just being responsive to your colleagues' comments. At the last conference, I had a poster. A student came up and mentioned something that I completely had missed in one of the statistical analyses. So I had to go back and double check everything and actually found a better way to rerun it, right? So in the end, use that approach for the publication that's going to be submitted any day now, hopefully, fingers crossed. Um, and so, yeah, just kind of being responsive, making note of the questions, the comments, and using that to kind of tighten up the project that bit more before submission.
I think that sounds like a great plan. Working, smarter, not harder. So to wrap up our last question, we wanted to ask if you had any resources or mentors or examples of abstracts that you can share with students to consult as models before they submit. And then if any of our students have any questions, what is the best way that they can get in contact with you?
Sure, sure. Yeah, so I always share with my students successful abstracts from the past. Um, the published abstracts for the conferences are also, I mean, it's a really great resource. You can see every abstract that was um, accepted for HBAs the last year. You can go back and however long you can go back, right? So there's a wealth of published abstracts that are already out there. Students who are working with advisors, absolutely ask the advisor for, hey, can you share an abstract? And of course, don't be afraid to, workshop the abstracts with your advisor, your mentor, with other graduate students, and so on. I'm happy to share any of my abstracts with anybody who wants to see them, and many of them, most of them have all been published as well. So you could find any of my abstracts in the AJPA and so on. Um, the other, I think, piece of kind of broad advice I'd suggest, and this is true for any kind of writing skill, right, is you learn to write by reading. So read widely, read abstracts, read papers, but read fiction too. I was thinking about this and um, I kept coming back to Ernest Hemingway, right? Does a really great job of writing very, very succinct prose that does a good job of painting a picture, right? Maybe Hemingway doesn't really apply to scientific abstracts, but you can read folks like that and get a sense of how to be really judicious in language and how to do more with less and so on. Um, and then let's see. So then the other question was, where can people get in touch with me? The easiest way is probably by email, Shattuck@fsu.edu. And I'm happy to answer any questions folks have, point them in the direction of any useful resources. Oh, one thing I can also mention too, I've not tried this myself, but I do wonder, maybe y'all have tried this, about running an abstract through AI. I would not be comfortable with having AI generate an abstract for me. But in terms of the process that I do, I usually sit down, I write the abstract, I write what I think needs to be in there, and then I look at the word count. I don't try to hit 250 words to start with. It's easier to whittle down than it is to try to get it there the first time, right? So I wind up with 300 words or um, whatever it may be, right? 257, whatever. And then you go back in and then you try to whittle down those 50 words, 7 words, whatever it may be. So what I haven't tried though is giving a oversharing abstract to AI, to ChatGPT or something, and then saying, hey, could you whittle this down into 250 words? I'm sure some students, some faculty have even done it. They may have had success with it. I don't know. But again, I would not want to submit a abstract that I myself did not generate, right, for ethical reasons. But potentially worth, if you're stuck on, how do I get rid of these last 7 words? Oh my God, I've been doing this all day. Maybe it's worth a shot.